Number 10. A suspicious Russian. While partying in Thailand, a woman had her drink spiked and almost ended up in some serious hot water. And I'm not talking about the waters off Phuket. The victim in the situation was in Patong with her fiance's sister, and her cousin. It was the fall of 2016, when the world still made more sense than it does now. They had just finished dinner and were down on Bangla Road, where all the bars and clubs are. They stopped at a pub to have a drink, planning to have an early night because they wanted to go sightseeing the next day. But after they ordered their drinks, a Russian couple approached them. The Russian man was incredibly large. He looked like he worked out every single day. Still, they seemed pretty friendly, even offering to share some drinks with the woman and her friends. This is where things started to get hazy. While the woman went dancing, the Russian woman started touching her face, saying weird stuff, and then she finally convinced her to go across the road. She said that everybody else had left, so they needed to go and find them. At this point, the woman was feeling the severe impact of the spiked drink. Around this time, the woman's fiancé was looking desperately for her. He had gone to the hotel, he had raised a huge commotion, and he had even gotten the police involved already. He could not find her anywhere. When he went outside again to keep looking, he and the woman's cousin saw her being forced into a taxi. The woman had been drugged. The Russians had organized her to be kidnapped, and a local guy was driving the cab. It was a kidnapping scheme that went wrong at the very last minute. If the fiancé hadn't gotten there when he did, his bride-to-be would have been sold to human traffickers and probably never seen again. Number 9. Walking to her death. At the age of 20, Wesley Street was convicted for assaulting, violating, and murdering his childhood friend after what should have been a fun night out. Wesley had joined Keely Bunker to celebrate her birthday. They went partying with more of Keely's friends, including her best friend Monique Riggin. Everyone drank and partied. It was a big celebration, and then the night finally ended. On September 19th, the group took a taxi back to Monique's house. Wesley was then given the duty of walking Keely safely back to her house, but Keely never got back to her home. Sometime during the walk, Wesley took her into a dark city park, sexually assaulted her, and then murdered her. He left her body brutalized and went back to his own place, where he slept like a baby. In the end, Keely Bunker did not have a very good birthday. According to what was revealed during the court proceedings, Keely was choked to death. It's believed that Wesley put her in a chokehold for several minutes, long enough that she was probably already dead long before he even released her throat. He's now gotten a minimum of 29 years in jail. But here's where this will upset you even more. Wesley Street had already been busted 3 times for sexual assault and illegal sexual activity with a child, and yet he had never gotten in trouble for these crimes. This meant nobody knew about his grim past, so he was able to have all these friends who trusted him and didn't know he was a predator. Nothing being done about this guy sooner or later directly resulted in Keely Bunker being strangled to death in a park on her birthday. Number 8. Stabbed for a lighter. Jacob Billington was out visiting some friends in Birmingham. Jacob and his buddies decided they were going to go out for a night on the town. They hit up some pubs, they had some drinks, and everything was totally fine. In fact, even when the end of the night came around, nothing horrible had happened. Jacob and his friends were walking home when a stranger approached them. The stranger asked Jacob if he had a lighter handy, and when Jacob said he didn't, the man pulled out a knife and stabbed him to death. Nobody has any idea what the motive was for the terrifying crime. According to Jacob's surviving friend, Michael Callahan, it was a completely random attack. Michael had actually been stabbed by the crazed assailant as well, spending 187 days recovering from his injuries in the hospital. Michael said everything happened so fast that it's hard to really remember. He knows the stranger came and asked for a lighter. Jacob said they didn't have one, and suddenly there was a scream. Before he could really comprehend what was happening, Jacob was dead, and he was pawing at the cuts of his throat from where he too had been stabbed. The knife that stabbed Michael in the throat severed his carotid artery, his jugular vein, and caused him to suffer a stroke in the hospital. The surgeons had to perform an emergency craniectomy, in which a part of his skull was removed. He was then put into a coma for 3 weeks. Michael survived the incident. The same can't be said for Jacob. As for the attacker, the police tracked down Zephaniah McLeod, who was taken into custody and later pleaded guilty to murder. He gave no reason for the killing. Number 7. The nightclub fire. November 28, 1942 is the date of the worst nightclub disaster in American history. It happened in Boston, Massachusetts at the Coconut Grove nightclub. At the time, this was one of the most popular night spots in all of Boston, even attracting celebrity visitors and guys from the mafia. 1942 was the beginning of the war. November 28th was Thanksgiving weekend, and so the club was filled to double its legal capacity. The fire started when a busboy lit a match so that he could see better after a couple had removed a light bulb from the ceiling. This match accidentally ignited the draperies, which soon had the entire nightclub filled with smoke and flame. This was the 1940s, so you can be certain that pretty much no fire regulations were being observed. The place was extremely unsafe, with most of the exit doors locked to prevent unwanted guests from strolling into the building. Within minutes, the entire nightclub was consumed by fire. In total, 492 people were burned alive inside the Coconut Grove nightclub, making it the second deadliest building fire in the US, even to this day. Number 6. Kidnapped and killed. Jassy Correa was kidnapped and then killed after walking out of a Boston nightclub. She was there to celebrate her birthday with a group of friends. According to the authorities, Jassy disappeared after leaving with a man from the venue nightclub. The suspected kidnapper in this case is Louis D. Coleman III, 10 years older than Jassy. The police pulled this guy over and found a dead body inside his trunk, with that body belonging to Jassy Correa. The police actually stopped him in Delaware, quite a far distance from Boston. It's likely that he took Jassy from the club, did something to her, and then killed her, and was driving her body as far away as possible when he got caught. Poor Jassy had just wanted to celebrate her birthday. She was a mother of 2, and now her kids will be growing up without a mom. Last we heard in 2021, prosecutors were deciding whether Louis D. Coleman III will be getting a life sentence or the death penalty. What do you think the verdict should be in this case? Is this one of the times where the death penalty is completely fair? Let us know your thoughts in the comments, and don't forget to hit subscribe. Number 5. A dangerous date. After a night on the town, a man in Fort Lauderdale, Florida, got robbed by his date. The victim had been identified only as Eddie, and he said that he was out with friends along the Las Olas Boulevard when they stopped in a Piazza Italiana. When they went into the bar, Eddie noticed a pretty woman sitting near the counter. He went up and started talking. She informed him that she just came from Los Angeles and that she was staying with her 3 kids at a hotel. Eddie was getting extremely excited. After all, it wasn't like he had many opportunities to meet beautiful women while out at night with his friends. At some point, he went to the ATM to take out money, but that's when everything really went wrong. The pair went back to Eddie's place. She asked for a drink. Eddie made 2, and then he got dizzy. Really dizzy. He didn't lose consciousness, but he definitely felt disoriented. His date started getting erratic. She stormed out of his house, and Eddie fell asleep. When he got up, his phone was gone, so was his wallet, and so was $6,000 from his bank account. Luckily, Eddie believes the woman will soon be apprehended. When she took his phone, she took a picture of her face, and this picture is saved to Eddie's cloud, which he has access to through his iPad. He's now given the police her picture in hopes they catch her soon and throw her in jail. Number 4. Stranger in the park. A young teacher, just 28 years old, was killed after a night out with friends. Much like a lot of young women who are killed after a night out, it happened in a dark city park. Her body was discovered 24 hours later in the park in southeast London, still wearing her sparkly boots and a slip dress. The police have since caught the murderer and solved the case. They say that Sabina Nessa was walking a very short distance from her house to a local pub to meet up with some friends. But as she was walking, 36-year-old Kochi Selamaj struck Sabina in the back of the head, then carried away her unconscious body. We don't know exactly how she died, but the coroner did say that she suffered extreme violence. When her body was discovered the next day in the park, the murderer had covered it over with leaves. Number 3. The party bus. Driving around the city on a party bus seems like the best way to celebrate a birthday. Unfortunately for a group of teenagers, what should have been a great time on a party bus turned into a bloodbath. A gunman fired roughly 70 rounds through the windows of the party bus as it drove down an Oakland freeway. The shooting killed at least 2 teenagers and wounded 5 others. The attack started just after midnight. The bus at the time was carrying over a dozen women back to Oakland from where they had been partying in San Francisco. The group was celebrating the 21st birthday of one of their friends. But what's really crazy is that the shooters actually followed the bus all the way off the interstate and into the city streets. There were at least 2 shooters unloading bullets on the bus, following everywhere it went. Luckily, the bus driver knew where the nearest police station was and drove his bus straight into the police station parking lot. Driving to the cops was enough to get the shooters to stop following them, but even after a car chased a bus filled with teenagers through the city streets, literally killing people inside, the cops haven't made any arrests yet. They don't have any suspects. They haven't found the vehicle, and basically nothing is getting done to solve the case. Number 2. Off-duty date night. A couple of off-duty police officers had their date night ruined when the fast food restaurant they went to in Louisville was robbed. Police Detective Chase McKeown and his wife, Officer Nicole McKeown, were having a Saturday date night at the Raising Cane restaurant near their place. They were sitting there eating when a man wearing a mask and a black hood walked inside the fried chicken restaurant, pulled out a gun, and tried to rob the place. First of all, who in their right mind tries to rob a chicken restaurant? What would you get away with? Maybe 40 bucks? In any case, the robbery went anyway. The cop couple stood up at the same time with their weapons drawn, ordering the robber to put his gun down. The criminal tried to run away, but the couple chased him down no problem and arrested him there in downtown Louisville with the help from the local cops. And number 1. Sold as slaves. Elia Beltran and her friend were walking out of Club Rio early on a Tuesday morning when they were both abducted. Out of all places, this happened in Texas, in West Oak Cliff. The kidnappers stole the 2 young girls at gunpoint, kept them prisoner inside their own 1997 Ford Explorer, and drove them around town deciding what he was going to do with them. He eventually let one of the girls escape, Carla. He only wanted Elia, and with the other girl gone, he then met up with a trio of hardened criminals. The kidnapper then tried to sell the young girl to these criminals as a human slave. With a gun put against her head, these people explained that she was going to be a prostitute, working for them and doing whatever they said. Things could have gone really, really badly for this girl if it hadn't been for one of the suspects stopping the car to check the tire. When the suspect was checking the tire, Elia ran away into a small group of houses and started screaming. Her kidnappers ran off. The police came, and she was rescued. The police have since put together a case against the 4 people involved in this little kidnapping scheme, and they're hopeful they can put the kidnappers away for good. After all, if this was an ordinary Tuesday night for them, just imagine how many people they had kidnapped before from nightclubs and forced them into prostitution. And in a seemingly safe part of Texas, no less.
10. Betting on death. 16-year-old Joshua Davies has been sentenced to 14 years in prison for beating his ex-girlfriend to death with a rock after his friend bet him a free breakfast that he wouldn't do it. Rebecca Aylward had her skull crushed for no other reason than to get some free pancakes. It was a heinous crime, one that the victim's mother has said she hopes Joshua will suffer pain and torment for committing for the rest of his life. It all began when Joshua and Rebecca broke up. According to sources close to both of them, Joshua developed a deep hatred for Rebecca after their relationship terminated. He regularly joked with friends that he was planning to kill Rebecca, a girl who was only 5'2". Most people never took these comments seriously, but some were still disturbed by the things he was saying. Joshua said he would poison her, maybe drown her in a river, or throw her off the edge of a cliff. Then in a text message over Facebook with one of his friends, the bet with the breakfast came up. His friend actually encouraged him to do it, saying it would be the best breakfast he ever paid for. He even called him sadistic, adding a smiley face at the end of the message. On the day of the murder, Rebecca was in a much different state of mind than Joshua. She purchased a new outfit to meet him, believing they were going to get back together. Her sister said she was dancing and singing before they met up. But when Joshua picked her up and brought her to a wooded area, things took a violent turn. He picked up a rock and ended her life by bashing her head in. 9. The Super Bowl bet. A man who made a Super Bowl bet proved to be a very sore loser. He lost $700 on a game in 2013 and was so angry that he killed his friend over it and was sentenced to life in prison. His name is Eddie Robertson from Newark. Before he shot and killed his friend, he screamed, "They cheated my team," referring to the Super Bowl bet that he wagered. He had made the bet with a longtime friend, Talif Crawley. The bet was that the San Francisco 49ers would win the Super Bowl, but they lost to the Baltimore Ravens after a highly disputed no call that some believe means the San Francisco team technically won the game. But that's not how the Super Bowl saw it, and Eddie was out $700. In the days that followed, Eddie was so mad that he refused to pay up. When his friend approached him on the street and asked him for the money, Eddie screamed at him, pulled out a gun, and shot him 6 times. He didn't really have anywhere to go or anywhere to hide, and so the police tracked him down almost immediately. He spent 3 years behind bars before finally getting the life sentence. The family of the deceased, particularly Crawley's mother, has said they are all very happy with the ruling. 8. Death by Nintendo Wii. Keith Weens, a retired Royal Canadian Mounted Police officer, admitted to killing his wife after losing a bet involving a game they were playing on the Nintendo Wii. It happened back in August of 2011. He shot his common-law wife, Lynn Kalmering, to death. He testified in court that he shot her at almost point-blank range in the face in self-defense. This was after the bet he lost escalated into a violent episode of domestic abuse. He said that his wife made a wager of a sexual nature on the night of the shooting. He agreed to the bet, but when it came time to pony up in the bedroom, he wasn't interested. He brushed his wife aside and tried to get into bed without doing what he said he would. Naturally, Lynn was pretty upset. She accused him of not finding her attractive anymore, and the fight spiraled from there. Nevertheless, they went to bed. He woke up later in the night with his wife beating him. She was punching him in the face while he was sleeping, and so he pulled out a handgun he kept in the bedside table and shot her in the face. This is what he testified to in the British Columbia Supreme Court. He said she was crazy and that if he wouldn't have blasted her face, she surely would have killed him. However, the police investigators found that Keith had no evidence on him that he was assaulted. They found little evidence that anything had happened the way he described it. They even found that his wife's body had been manipulated after death. In other words, he tampered with the crime scene. And seeing as he's an ex-cop, he knew just how to do it. But it didn't work, and he was busted for murder. 7. The new name. A man in New Zealand lost a bet and had to change his name. He didn't change his name from Mark to Marcus or something simple, but to an enormous and absurd name that wouldn't fit on any passport or driver's license in the world. He changed his name to something with 99 characters. It was just one character short of the Department of Internal Affairs' 100-character limit. But here's what's really funny. The man forgot about the change. He did it as a joke bet and filed all the paperwork, but then never got a response and forgot that it happened. But the paperwork went through and the name was changed. He only found out when his passport recently expired and he ran into trouble since he no longer existed. At least not under his old name. He's now legally called Full Metal Havoc, more sexy, intelligent than Spock, and all the superheroes combined with Frost Nova. But he prefers being called Mr. Frost Nova. It's just easier that way. Would you go through with changing your name if that was the deal in a bet you made? Let us know in the comments below, and if you're liking this video, don't forget to subscribe. 6. 22 pancakes. A man lost a bet and had to eat 22 pancakes in a single sitting. It's not quite as dramatic as shooting someone in the street, but still probably a lot less appealing than it sounds. The bet was over fantasy football. Abhi Shah would have won if it hadn't been for Panthers running back Christian McCaffrey straining his hamstring earlier on in the season. But there was nothing Abhi could do about it. His fantasy football league lost, and as a result, he was bound by his bet. He had to spend 24 hours in an IHOP. But he had one way out. His friends told him he could take 1 hour off his sentence for every 2 pancakes he ate. In the end, he managed to get out of the breakfast joint in just 11.5 hours, scarfing down 22 flapjacks. And it wasn't easy. He said it was a struggle and that the butter was extremely thick. His friends stopped by to see him as he steadily ate his way to freedom, making it less of a chore than it would have been otherwise. He really did try to eat more pancakes, but his body just couldn't take it. 5. A fatal crash. A man lost $5,500 at the casino just before he wound up murdered. Andrew Witt was captured on surveillance footage at the Caesars Windsor Casino, repeatedly making withdrawals from an ATM machine. Even in the grainy surveillance footage, it was pretty obvious he was having a hard time. His face was beet red. He looked like a man who had just flushed his savings down the toilet, and yet he kept coming back for more. Finally, a single roll at the craps table lost him $2,500, and he stormed out the front doors. No more money left to squander. Just 1 hour after leaving the casino, Andrew was dead. He had been riding as a passenger in a vehicle belonging to his friend, Andrew Cowan. Cowan is now on trial for first-degree murder. The reason is that he drove the F-150 pickup on purpose straight through a flower bed, which he used as a ramp as if he were playing Need for Speed or Grand Theft Auto. The truck went airborne and smashed into the side of a brick building. The crash killed his friend, but he survived. When questioned by the police, Cowan said he was trying to kill them both on purpose because they were both distraught about losing all their money at the casino. But the court didn't quite buy it, as prosecutors say the deceased wasn't done with his own life yet. He had no say in the matter as his friend steered them into a wall. Either way, too much betting sent one Andrew to the grave and the other to jail. 4. Duct taped to a traffic sign. The police in Texas were called to a traffic intersection because a boy was duct taped to a stop sign. Yes, this is something you think only happens in movies about college hazing, but it indeed happened. It was a peculiar sight, and several people passing through the intersection called the police to take care of it. Then when the cops arrived, they found a man coming toward them with a knife in his hand. One of the officers shouted to drop the knife or he would be tased. But this proved to be an extreme overreaction. The guy had brought the knife to cut the other guy down from the stop sign. He was one of the ones who had taped him to it in the first place. It's because the victim, Miguel Chavez, had lost a bet over an NBA game between the Rockets and Warriors and agreed to have his friends duct tape him to the traffic sign. In the end, Chavez was cut down, nobody was tased, and the police told them not to mess around with city property again. The cops even gave the 17-year-old kid a ride home out of pity. 3. Stunned. John and Nicole Grant, husband and wife, are both huge NFL fans, but they didn't like the same team. John is a Bears fan and Nicole is a Packers fan. When the team matched up against each other, the husband and wife decided to make things interesting. They were watching the game at their local bar in Wisconsin when they went outside for a smoke break. That was where they decided to make a wager that would be very painful for the loser. Nicole agreed that if the Packers lost the match, she would allow her husband to tase her. And the Packers did indeed lose. They had to go outside the bar, and John used a stun gun to zap her in the buttock twice and once on her thigh. This was where everything went wrong. Nicole either forgot she had made the bet or simply hated her husband. You see, in Wisconsin, the possession of a taser is illegal. She called the police after getting tased to tell them what her husband did. They arrived and arrested John for the possession of an illegal weapon. He's now been stuffed into the court system and could face 6 years in prison. All because of a bet gone wrong with his vengeful wife. Talk about spite. 2. Addicted to stabbing. A gambling addict in East London also turned out to be addicted to stabbing, or at least addicted to stabbing his wife. His name is Jalal Uddin, and he killed his wife, Asma Begum, by stabbing her 58 times in their apartment. And it was all because of a bet. Well, it was actually a lot of bets. His wife had complained prior to the incident that her husband sometimes beat her up if she refused to give him money that he could take to gamble with. She would have to give him money in the end just so he would stop hitting her. The employees of the William Hill Bookmakers, the place where he made all his bets, even had a rather rude nickname for him. They called him the Angry Indian because he would get so angry when losing that he would beat on the gaming machines. In total, he had defaulted on over $16,000 in loans taken out just to fuel his gambling addiction. The final straw came after he lost a big bet, went home in a furious rage, and took it out by chopping his wife to pieces. He's since been found guilty of murder. 1. The worst Robin Hood bet. Sometimes a wager can cost you everything. As reported by Vice News, a young retailer trader who prefers to remain anonymous explained how he lost everything he had on a single Robin Hood bet. The individual had moved to the U.S. at the age of 18. He started making money with a job, and by the age of 26 had $300,000 sitting in a savings account. He decided he wanted more money and started following the market. His first bet was $5,000 on AMC. This turned to $15,000, which he bet on something else, which turned into $50,000. He was making so much money that he decided to go all or nothing. He leveraged a bet under an underlying Alibaba stock, investing $300,000. It was every single liquid asset in his account. This was in February. Fast forward to April. His mother warned him to get out and take what money he could because the stock was sinking. Instead, he put in another $100,000. He now had $400,000 riding on this single stock. When he woke up one morning, the stock had dropped to almost nothing and his $400,000 was gone. He had to shut down his Robinhood account, walking away with barely enough money to pay his rent. After 8 years of saving, he was back at the same place he was when he was 18. 10. Hiring a hitman. In Texas, a prominent veterinarian has been accused of hiring a hitman to kill her ex-husband. Following the accusations, she leapt to her death from her condo, 7 floors above the ground. Her name was Valerie Busick McDaniel, and she was arrested back in March following an elaborate police sting in which she paid an undercover officer pretending to be a hitman. She gave him $20,000 and a pair of watches to kill her ex. She collaborated with her boyfriend at the time, Leon Jacob, who also wanted to have his ex-partner murdered. Both were duped by the undercover cop and promptly arrested. The cops made a pretty good show of it as well. Both the exes, who were supposed to be murdered, voluntarily posed for pretend crime scene photographs, in which they appeared to be dead. The undercover cop then showed the pictures of the dead ex-spouses, proving that the jobs were complete. The money changed hands, and that was that. But Valerie managed to get released from jail by posting a $50,000 bond. A few days later, she jumped out of her apartment to her death. I guess for Valerie, a leap of desperation seemed a lot better than a life in jail for attempted murder. 9. The Killer Pianist. A professional pianist turned to murder in South Carolina, stabbing a veterinarian to death in her own home. His name is Zachary Hughes, and he is being charged with first-degree murder. But here's where things get truly strange. According to investigators with the Greenville County Sheriff's Office, nobody knows why he stabbed the veterinarian. He has no criminal background and didn't seem to be connected to Christina Lorraine in any meaningful way. And yet, Sheriff Hobart Lewis said Zachary picked her out on purpose, went to her home, and murdered her in an extraordinarily violent fashion. She was 41 years old, a dedicated veterinarian, and respected member of her community. Zachary stabbed her multiple times and then turned himself into the police. Police are pretty sure it was an isolated incident, but they still haven't worked out a motive. Zachary isn't talking. Christina had only been working at the veterinary hospital in her neighborhood for about 3 years. As far as anyone can tell, they hadn't even met before. Considering all these factors, it's bizarre that Zachary turned himself in at all. If he had no record and no links to Christina, he may very well have gotten away with it. 8. The Neighbor's Dog. A veterinarian has been accused of killing her neighbor's dog because she was sick of its barking. Yes, she is indeed one of the worst veterinarians in history. She comes from Jefferson Parish, Kelly Foles of Camille Court in River Ridge. The 35-year-old vet has been accused of shooting a puppy. It wasn't even a fully adult dog, but a 15-month-old puppy named Bruiser, an American bulldog. And if things could get any worse, she killed the dog about a week before Christmas. The owner of the dog rushed him to the nearest veterinary hospital, the exact one where Kelly worked, but the dog could not be saved. Naturally, the owner of the dog reported Kelly to the police. She has since been booked on aggravated cruelty to an animal, a pair of drug offenses tied to narcotics discovered in her house, and the illegal discharge of a weapon. But she should get charged for trespassing as well, since she actually shot the dog in her neighbor's yard. She complained a few times about it barking. She claimed it was aggressive, and then she went over to his house and shot it. But when police canvassed the neighborhood, not a single other neighbor said that the dog had ever shown aggressive behavior. It just barked, you know, like a dog. As for the drugs that the police found in the veterinarian's house, they included diazepam and Adderall. It looks like the vet was all jacked up on drugs. She got frustrated with the barking outside and thought it was completely okay to start shooting. And in case you were wondering, she has indeed been fired from her job at the veterinary clinic and will probably not be getting work ever again. 7. Liquid heroin. A veterinarian has been caught implanting liquid heroin in puppies and using them as unwitting drug mules. This sorry excuse for a veterinarian is Andres Lopez Elias, a Colombian national who was sentenced to only 6 years in prison for what he did to these poor animals. From his veterinary clinic at a farm in the Colombian city of Medellin, he stuffed bags of liquid heroin into the stomachs of purebred puppies and then stitched the bags into their stomach linings. It was a terrible attempt at trafficking drugs from Colombia into America. When the police finally raided this guy's practice, they found several puppies already filled with balloons of heroin and others being prepared for surgery. Luckily, they were able to remove the bags of drugs from the dogs, although 3 of the puppies later died from viruses they contracted during the operation. Several of the dogs were adopted and given new homes, including a Rottweiler who now works for the Colombian National Police as a drug detection dog. Another of the dogs was adopted by a Colombian police officer as a family pet. Do you think 6 years in prison is enough for a drug smuggler who used perfectly innocent puppies to transport heroin? Let us know what you think his sentence should really be in the comments below. And if you're liking this video, be sure to hit the thumbs up and subscribe buttons if you haven't already. 6. Veterinarian's poison. A veterinarian has been given 25 years in prison for killing her husband and then messing with the evidence. Dr. Wendy Mae Davidson from San Angelo killed Air Force Staff Sergeant Michael L. Severance back in 2005. In January, she reported him missing to the police. But in reality, Dr. Davidson, the owner of a small animal clinic, poisoned him with a mix of drugs that she was able to procure at her animal hospital: phenobarbital and pentobarbital. Cops managed to solve the case thanks to the veterinarian's brother, who ratted her out. You see, Dr. Davidson had told her brother that she had found her husband dead in bed, filled with stab wounds. She thought that one of her own family members had killed him, so she dumped him in a tank on her ranch friend's property. She told her brother the reason that she dumped the body was to cover up the crime for whoever stabbed him to death. But really, it was her who did it. When the police searched her clinic records, they discovered that she had logged administering phenobarbital to a dog. But when they reached out to that dog's owner, the owner said they had no idea what the cops were talking about. She had administered the drug to her husband, then stabbed him 41 times before throwing him in the tank on her friend's property. She even weighed him down with a boat anchor so that he'd never be found. If she hadn't tried to play it off to her brother, she might have actually gotten away with murder. 5. Stealing a corpse. Evan Gregorio took his 5-year-old Tibetan Shih Tzu to the vet on a Saturday morning. When Evan woke up, he noticed that his dog was looking a little slow and not behaving quite like its normal self. Little did he know the dog would only be alive for a few more hours. Evan brought his dog, named Puppy, to the veterinary specialist of Sydney. The vet advised him that the dog's condition was not great and that the dog should spend at least the next 24 hours in the intensive care unit. The clinic gave him an estimate of around $3,349. He had to pay $1,500 of it up front. He didn't care about the money, he just wanted his dog to get better. 4 hours later, he received a very distressing call. The veterinarian called to say that his dog was having a heart attack and asked if they should revive him. In shock, Evan screamed that of course they need to revive him. But by this time it was too late. His dog was dead. When he went to pick up his dog, or rather the body of his dog, the veterinarian gave him a bill of $2,500. Obviously, Evan wasn't interested in paying $2,500 for a dead dog. He had already given them $1,500 and they hadn't saved his animal. In response, the clinic refused to hand over Puppy's corpse, instead holding on to the dead dog's body for ransom. And to make matters worse, it was just days before Christmas. Luckily, Evan made a huge stink and went to the local news stations, who swarmed the clinic with their cameras. The second that the clinic began to receive bad publicity, they handed the dog's remains over so that Evan could spread Puppy's ashes at his favorite park. But really, they only did it once the cameras showed up. 4. The worst animal enforcement officer. Jennifer Lynn George isn't a veterinarian, but she was an animal enforcement officer. She worked in Western Pennsylvania in an industry where you would expect the person to be an animal lover. And yet now she is facing charges of animal cruelty after she allegedly abandoned her dog when she moved to a new house. Jennifer, 46 years old, is facing a charge of aggravated cruelty to animals causing serious bodily injury or death. She also faces 3 counts of neglect. The case has been called ironic, considering her entire job was to investigate animal cruelty and give humane treatment to animals while in her care. And yet, despite her title, when she moved out of her mobile home in December of 2020, she abandoned her German Shepherd inside the house. A man who was interested in buying the home went to visit it, where he found the dead dog inside, covered in its own feces. She literally left it in the house to starve to death. She was released on a bond of $10,000 and is still awaiting her preliminary hearing. And seeing as this was only animal cruelty, she's probably not going to get much more than a slap on the wrist, unfortunately. 3. Dead in Montana. Veterinarian Brian Allen Rain opened up a small practice in the town of Geraldine, Montana, after moving there in 1996. Shortly after, the 31-year-old man was found shot to death in his trailer. What followed were a series of trials and over 18 years of investigating without any serious resolution to what happened back in 1996. The case is still unsolved. Here's what we know. Brian was a handsome animal doctor who caused quite a stir in the sleepy town. Women were interested in dating him, but none seemed able to catch his attention. Then he met Ann Wishman, whom he hired to clean his home. As the two were spending so much time together, they began to see one another romantically. At around the same time, mysterious things started happening to Brian. Rocks were thrown through the windows of his animal clinic. People were calling him and then hanging up, and it seemed as if someone had it out for him. Then suddenly and without warning, in July of 1996, he was found dead. Police at first thought he might have killed himself because the murder weapon was placed near his hand. The gun was also registered to Brian. But alas, evidence in the home showed that there was a struggle before the death. During the investigation, they discovered that Ann Wishman had an ex-boyfriend, Thomas Jarzewski, who was not thrilled about her dating someone new. He was obsessed with Ann, and the locals said he was dangerous. Police finally arrested the man in 1998, but he was let go by a judge who said there wasn't enough evidence to keep him in jail. He was arrested again in 2014, put on trial, and found not guilty. To this day, not a single person has been convicted for killing Brian, although we're pretty sure it was Thomas. 2. Held at gunpoint. A veterinarian got a lot more than they bargained for when a woman slipped them a note saying they were being held captive by their boyfriend. According to the police in Florida, it's all thanks to this veterinarian that the woman was able to escape the dangerous clutches of her psychotic boyfriend. The note read as follows: "Call the cops. My boyfriend is threatening me. He has a gun. Please don't let him know." The veterinarian was obviously alarmed by what they read, but they did as the note asked. They phoned the police, and officers with the DeLand Police Department came and took the man away. He was identified as Jeremy Floyd, a convicted felon who had been holding his girlfriend captive for 2 days while repeatedly beating her and threatening her with a weapon. She was unable to leave his house, but managed to convince Jeremy that she needed to take their dog to the vet. He grudgingly agreed, taking her and the dog to the veterinarian along with his gun. On their way there, he said that if she tried to give him the slip, he would kill her and her entire family. The boyfriend has since been charged with domestic violence, false imprisonment, and a whole slew of other crimes that will hopefully keep him locked up behind bars. In this case, it was really more of when veterinarians saved the day, rather than when veterinarians go wrong. 1. Unsanitary conditions. A veterinarian in Wilco, Texas has been arrested after a bulldog died in her care. The veterinarian is now being charged with animal cruelty, with officers saying the dog died because of unsanitary conditions. Her name is Dana R. Bame, and she turned herself into the police voluntarily. But that doesn't make her any less of a horrible person. When the owner of a 5-year-old bulldog named Jax went to pick up his pet, he couldn't believe the state the animal was in. Jax had been boarded at the clinic for about a week, but when his owner went to get him, the dog couldn't walk. He was covered in urine and his body had sores all over it. He quickly took the dog to another veterinarian for emergency treatment, but Jax had to be put down because he was in such bad shape. And yet before this, Jax had been perfectly healthy. Investigators found that Jax had been severely injured. He was missing all of his skin in some areas, exposing bone and tendons. He also had tiny holes in his legs. The police quickly issued a search warrant, at which point investigators found despicable conditions in the veterinary hospital. It was unclean, unhealthy, covered in feces and urine, and animals were stuck in kennels with no food or water. The vet is now facing charges of animal cruelty, their hospital has been shut down, and they've earned themselves a nice, toasty seat in hell, or wherever it is bad veterinarians go when they die. Thanks for watching. What's your worst experience ever with a veterinarian? Let us know all about it in the comments below, and if you enjoyed the video, be sure to hit subscribe for even more amazing content. See you next time. Bye.